These are the tales from South Florida for you, with your host, Bill Monty.
Hello, my friends, and welcome to another episode of Tales from South Florida. I am your host, Bill Monty. You might have just heard that in the intro music. And this week, I want to address a communication that I got from someone who has sent me a couple of messages, and thank you so much. Again, I love getting messages from you, which you can do by just hitting the comment button on whatever platform you're listening on. You can use the SpeakPipe method to do that. It lets you leave a 90-second voicemail, or you can email me at billmonty04@gmail.com. But I want to give a shout out to Holly Rose 7, who wrote to me and said, going north, we always stopped at Stuckey's. Did you? They were known for Pecan Log Rolls, but I loved their brownies with nuts. And yeah, boy, did that bring back a memory for me, thinking about that. So there was two places that I recall that I always wanted to stop at when we were traveling. And one was Stuckey's, and another one was one very similar to Stuckey's called Horne's. Maybe it was called Horny's. That's what my brother and I used to say, which made us giggle hysterically in the backseat while my father got annoyed. But Stuckey's and Horne's were basically the same. There were places that you could stop, you could use the restroom. Some of them had gas stations so you could refill the gas. In Florida, they were known for having a lot. Usually there was someplace set up that you could buy grapefruits and oranges, maybe pecans, depending how far north you were, or some different types of nuts. But it was when you went inside that the magic began. And yes, as Holly Rose 7 mentioned, one of the things was the Pecan Log Roll, which I always wanted to have, but then once I got it, I was never really crazy about. But they also had orange juice that you could get. Normally it was free, like a little tiny cup of orange juice, but it was usually free to try to entice you into buying some oranges, which we didn't need because in our backyard at the time, we had an orange tree, a grapefruit tree, a kumquat tree, a lemon tree. So we were kind of set in the citrus department. Sometimes they would have like a grill, so you could pick up hamburgers and hot dogs. They had the usual souvenir toys, the chocolate alligator that you could get, but also there was the games you could play, like car bingo or automobile bingo. Remember that? Where you would look for a certain make of a car or perhaps a license plate from another state. Certainly as you got further up north, sometimes you would see a lot of those. Most of the time, you just got Florida and Georgia a whole bunch of the time. So those were great places to stop. And boy, did that bring back the memories of, first off, going there, and then second, begging my father to stop at every single one we saw along the highway, which was generally about every other exit. There were a lot of them back in the day. And it got me thinking, whatever happened to Stuckey's and Horne's or Horny's? Because I know as recently as the mid-90s, I do remember stopping at one of them. I was on a business trip in Jacksonville and coming back somewhere around Palm Bay. I don't remember if it was Stuckey's or Horne's. I stopped and picked up a couple of little tacky gifts to bring home, just to kind of like a laugh sort of thing. My daughter was little, so I got her a couple of little toys to play with. And that's the last time I recall. And the one that I was at, whichever one it was kind of sad. It certainly was not kept up well. The other ones I remember was probably at the Fort Pierce exit off of the Turnpike or off of 95, because they're both really close to each other right there. I think those buildings you can see the distinctive V-shaped buildings that they were, but they've been taken over now by like fruit stands or something like that. But those are the last ones that I remember. So I thought I would do a little bit of research and figure out whatever happened to Stuckey's and Horne's. So here's what I found out. Stuckey's was started back in 1937 by a gentleman named W.S. Sylvester Stuckey Sr. Sylvester founded a roadside pecan stand in Eastman, Georgia. That was back in 1937. He did that on a $35 loan, which I imagine was a lot of money back in the day. His wife Ethel Stuckey started making and selling old-fashioned candies, including the famous Stuckey's Pecan Log Roll. Of course, it wasn't famous yet, but it would be. In 1948, they moved from a small candy kitchen to a candy plant in Eastman, which also began to serve as their distribution center. In 1952, they debuted the flavored pecans in vacuum-sealed church key cans. Starting in the 1960s, well, that's when Stuckey's started becoming an empire, a roadside empire. I mean, we have to think about it. Were it not for Stuckey's, would we have Cracker Barrel stores right now? Because they are kind of the same thing, on a much grander scale. Stuckey's were smaller. At the time, there was about 368 stores. They were in 30-plus states. They had billboards everywhere. Pecans were their big moneymaker. In '64, Stuckey's merged with Pet Milk Company to add capital for the company, continue expanding. And then throughout the 60s and the 70s, travelers like me and like Holly Rose 7 and her family would seek out those teal blue roofs and grow to love all their souvenirs, their clean restrooms, which was a big deal back in the day. And also they had delicious breakfast, and like I mentioned, they had a grill that you could get hamburgers and hot dogs, grilled cheese, and things like that. During the 1970s, however, the Stuckey stores began to dwindle. Mr. Stuckey Sr. died in 1977. That was the same year that Illinois Central Industries bought Pet Milk Company, and they began to close hundreds of Stuckey's stores across the country. Back in 1984, Billy Stuckey Jr., son of the founder and a 5-term congressman from Georgia's 8th District, acquired Stuckey's to turn the company around. He launched Stuckey's Express concept, created the store within the store, and expanded to over 165 locations in 17 states. When the Great Recession hit, Eastman Candy Store closed its doors. That was back in 2009. But you can still find Stuckey's candy online and pecans online. They are still at apparently 50 licensed locations. I don't know where. I wasn't able to find that out. But if you are missing being able to dine on or eat the famous pecan log roll or eat some Stuckey's pecans, then good news for you. Just head over online to stuckeys.com. And apparently you can order some there. So that's a nice little surprise, right? So Horne's was created by a man named Bob Horne, not Bob Horny, so it kind of settles that right there. And when Horne was 22, he began working at a Stuckey's in the original one in Eastman, Georgia. That's where he made his own candy for the restaurant. But after a few years of working there, he decided he was going to get out, create his own restaurant and candy shop. And on October 4th, 1948, Bob Horne founded his first store located a short distance from the Beauty Rest Cabin, which his family owned near Jacksonville, Florida. The original concept was to have the stores along major highways and to sell candies, nuts, and souvenirs to travelers. In 1950, Horne's Enterprises began a $2 million expansion plan after selling 235 shares of common stock of the company. As he expanded the chain, Horne started to include other amenities to attract tourists along the highways, such as motels, and many of the restaurants to create Horne's Motor Lodge and Restaurant. On May 7, 1953, the company was incorporated in Florida as Horne's of Bayard Incorporated. That's for Bayard, Florida. By 1956, 8 years after being founded, the chain had expanded to 17 locations in 8 states. Horne also began having his restaurant's roofs painted bright yellow to attract customers and erecting tall signs outside the restaurants to be seen from the highway. In 1963, over 1,250 signs had been built along the highways to advertise Horne's. By the time that he was 30 years old, he was a millionaire. In 1964, the Greyhound Corporation purchased nearly all the chain stock from Bob Horne for $14 million. Boy, in '64, that was a lot of money. When Horne sold the company, he had 55 restaurants in 15 states. And several years after selling the restaurant chain, Horne would later go on to develop Powderhorn Mountain in Watauga County, North Carolina, with his wife Penny. In 1967, the original Horne's Beauty Rest Cabin closed, but later reopened as Bayard Antique Village, which remains open to this day. In the late 1960s, Horne's expanded into Canada, where 3 branches were built. By the 1970s, though, highway travel became less profitable for the chain, and it began to lose its business. And in 1981, Atlantic National Bank took over, and they ended the Horne's chain. In 1982, the last company-owned restaurant closed, and by 1986, the trademark on Horne's Motor Lodge restaurant expired. Now, as of April 2024, the company operates 1 location still in Virginia, Port Royal, Virginia to be exact. So if you want to go to Horne's these days, that's where you're going to have to go. In Florence, South Carolina, a former Horne's, still bearing the name but with no connection to the original restaurant, remained open until 2013. None of the Horne's Motor Lodges remain open today. The last motel to close its door in Ocala was demolished in early December 2014. So those are two of the stops. I think the third one that comes to mind definitely would be Howard Johnson's. Howard Johnson's, I think, was more of a restaurant, also famous for its ice creams and its hotels. I remember staying in a lot of Howard Johnson's as a kid when we were traveling around Florida in different states. While they were not like a just stop along the way like Horne's and Stuckey's were, I think those were the big three if you were traveling in the 60s and the 70s that you stopped to refresh and get some food and get some snacks. I hope you enjoyed this little trip down memory lane, courtesy of Holly Rose 7 and Bill Monty and the Tales from South Florida. I'd love it if you joined us over on our new social media platform too, Blue Sky. We're moving everything off of Facebook and Instagram and over to Blue Sky, which we find to be a friendlier social media site. Once you go there, just simply look up Bill Monty and you can join our starter pack and have a lot more fun. With over 3,000 followers now, Tales from South Florida on Blue Sky is growing, so come and follow where the skies are bluer. And please remember to hit that follow or subscribe or like button wherever it is that you're listening to this episode. I do appreciate it. It does help us to grow the podcast, and that is free to subscribe or to follow, and simply reminds you when a new episode has been dropped. Once again, thank you for listening to this Tales from South Florida. We'll be back soon with another episode. Hey, maybe we'll stay on the road and visit some of those old places pre-Disney that the family used to travel to. Until that time, my friends, please remember to always be safe and be kind. Now, stick around. We're going to play the entire theme song, which everyone loves. Hit it, boys.
Let's take a talk down memory lane, 'cause the stories around here are just insane. Pirates World, the Sporto and Wolfies too, Palm Beach to Key West, that's where we grew. These are the tales from South Florida for you, with your host Bill Monty.